Joining me now for our political panel is the Shadow Disabilities Minister, Senator Mitch Fifield in Melbourne, and also Labor MP Andrew Leigh joins us from Canberra. Good morning to both of you, gentlemen.
Good morning.
First
David.
to you,
Morning, Mitch.
Andrew Leigh. A response to what Eric Abetz was claiming there, that the government had broken a promise when it comes to giving unions access to work sites. There has been an increase in the number of union visits to sites over the past 12 months.
Well, David, unions play an important role in terms of looking at the conditions that workers face, and so there'll be perfectly reasonable situations in which union officials will go into work sites. But I think what we've seen in Australian politics is two very different visions of industrial relations. The last time that the Coalition had an industrial relations policy, it cut overtime. It reduced penalty rates, and it was seen as being an extreme industrial relations policy by the Australian people. I think it would have been good yesterday if we'd actually seen what the Coalition's plans are for industrial relations. But instead, what we got yesterday was what Senator Abetz described as being a skeleton. Arthur Sinodinos on this program yesterday said was the beginning of the dance of the seven veils. This is kind of macabre stuff, David, and you've got to wonder whose head's going to be on the platter at the end of it all.
Mitch Fifield, speaking of yesterday, we didn't seem to get a whole lot of answers out of Senator Abetz earlier in the program when it comes to a few of these policy ideas that may or may not be announced this week. What we had yesterday from Tony Abbott was sort of a relaunch of policies that have already been on the table. Is that enough to satisfy the electorate till the time of polling day?
Well, what we had yesterday from Tony Abbott was our priorities and our directions. We already do have a significant body of policy work which has been released. You touched on industrial relations before. We already have the policy of bringing back the Australian Building and Construction Commission. We already have the policy of setting up a registered organisations agency that can apply to the union movement at the same level of accountability that there is with companies. These policies are out there, as is our plan to put local control in schools, set up local community hospital boards. We have a lot of policy out there, but obviously as we get closer to the election we'll release additional policies and we'll provide some greater detail. But we have a plan, it's a positive plan, and Tony's going to spend the week explaining that plan to the Australian people.
Will we be seeing any more US-style sort of campaign launches like we saw yesterday, Mitch Fifield, do you think?
Well, I don't know what's particularly American or presidential about what happened yesterday. You need to have a venue, you need to have seats, you need to have people, and you need to have a microphone. And yes, all those elements were there. But look, I think we can get distracted and sidetracked by the backdrops which are there for any particular speech by a party leader. What matters is the substance, what matters is the policy, and fundamental to everything that Tony Abbott is going to be talking about this week, right through to the next election, is the fact that you can't do any of the good things that we want to do unless you have a strong economy, unless you have a government that's living within its means. And that's one of the big problems with this government, is that they've got a cumulative budget deficits of $172 billion, and if that's not addressed, if that's not paid down, if government doesn't live within its means, then that will compromise the opportunities which government is there to provide for Australians.
Andrew Leigh, the report in today's papers is that on Thursday Tony Abbott will pledge not to touch superannuation as he searches for savings in his first year if he's elected Prime Minister. Is that a commitment that Labor could make as well?
Certainly our touching of superannuation will only be in a positive direction, David. I mean, we have universal superannuation because a Labor government put it in place in 1992 over the objections of those in the Coalition. And we're increasing universal superannuation contributions now because the Labor government believes that Australians deserve to retire in dignity. But again, we're doing that over the objections of the Coalition. And now you've had Eric Abetz on your program, unwilling to rule out that the Coalition will damage superannuation. I think this is deeply troubling. The Coalition, of course, has a serious budget problem. That arises because the only things they've committed to are getting rid of a carbon price, the most effective way of dealing with climate change, and getting rid of a mining tax, which is a profits-based mining tax, the sensible way of taxing mining. They then need to do a lot of slash and burn to make up the $70 billion gap that they have in their costings. We know a bit about how they're going to do that. We know that they're going to get rid of the school kids bonus, for example, $15,000 to eligible parents.
Okay, well let's stop talking about the all right, let's get back onto some other issues. I want to talk about Senator Cory Bernardi. He is in the newspapers again, this time for links to a lobby group that's associated with gun control, or it's a pro-gun lobby group, I should say, and pro-tobacco as well. Now, the government claims that there is some sort of conflict of interest here with Cory Bernardi. Can you explain that to me, Andrew Lee? Because I find that conflict of interest a little bit hard to pinpoint.
Well, David, ALEC, which is the group that Mr Bernardi's a member of, is a group which is allying with the National Rifle Association to make sure that the US doesn't put in place major changes in its gun laws. And it's a group which has challenged Australian tobacco laws in the courts. So you have the Liberal Party of Australia taking large donations from Big Tobacco, now with a senior member, a close ally of the opposition leaders, being in charge of a committee of members' interests, but he can't even declare his own interest in being part of a group that supports challenging Australia's anti-tobacco laws. I think it's time for Mr Abbott to sack Mr Bernardi.
But why should he disclose it? Why should he actually disclose that? Because, you know, it's not an office holder position. It's not an organisation where necessarily $300 in donations were made, or where membership could result in a conflict of interest. Where is the conflict?
Well, David, let me read you the rule that says that senators are required to disclose any other interests where a conflict of interest with a senator's public duties could foreseeably arise or be seen to arise. If I was a member of a group that was challenging Australian laws in the High Court, I would be disclosing that to the Australian people. That's what Mr Bernardi hasn't done. And let's remember that the position he currently has, he got after being sacked by Mr Abbott as a sort of consolation prize for his earlier extreme comments. This is somebody
and you think he should be sacked now?
This is somebody whose political statements put him out of the mainstream. His views are far more extreme than a moderate like Mitch Fifield.
Okay, well, I've got to get a response from Mitch Fifield before we run out of time. Mitch, it's all yours.
Thanks, David. Look, I don't take at face value anything that the Australian Labor Party says. Essentially, all I've heard Andrew say is that he's against freedom of association. Look, Cory Bernardi has been the chair of the Senators' Interest Committee for quite some time. He has said that he has fulfilled his obligations. Obviously, it's important for all members and senators to fulfil their obligations and to declare what is required. But I actually think a more interesting question here is about the Prime Minister's own declarations to the House Register of Interests. The Prime Minister hasn't declared anything or updated her Register of Interests since about the middle of last year. Now, it's extremely unusual for a Member of Parliament not to have anything to declare over a 6-month period, particularly a Prime Minister.
Okay, we are out of time.